They say with healthcare, don't ask me who there is, right? It's just a figure of speech. They say with healthcare, you could make it available. Universally so even. You can make it affordable. You can make it for free even. And you could try and make it as good as possible. Maybe even excellent. But what you can't do, it is, at least right now, practically impossible, is to achieve all three of those things at the same time. Sean Michael Small here on Talking Point on WESN, the Content Capital Television with a Difference, broadcasting in HD, the only station in the nation that is the nation station. For all, not just for some. Healthcare. After everything that's happened, I am even more curious to the answer to this question. Which one of those things did we compromise for the others with regards to our own healthcare system? Now, evidence of aspects being compromised, one for the other. And again, let me go through the three things: availability, affordability, and how good it is. One of those three things, at the minimum, needs to be compromised if we want the other two to be at a high level. Which one did we do? Well, in the past, long wait times and shortages suggested that even though we had health centers and a public health system, it wasn't quite as universal as we may have wanted it to be. And that might have been where the compromise was. Now, on the other hand, while there are actually some serious medical capabilities within the public health system, I know of surgeries done by the public health system. You know, we're not talking just, oh, you have a cold or you have a chipped tooth and we'll see about that. You know, helping with prostate problems and cut tendons in a wrist are just two cases that I know of done by the public health system. But there are also areas of deficiencies. And now we have to ask, to what extent is Port of Spain General an area of deficiency? Is the NICU, is the prenatal unit an area of deficiency with regards to the ability of medical service provided? Because one of the things that has me puzzled is the fact that we continue to open up new healthcare facilities. And I know that even before, we had issues with availability of nurses, availability of specialist doctors, and availability of pharmaceuticals, as well as medical supplies. So we could even raise a fourth finger. Medical supplies like needles and gloves. Because what's the point of a glove if it doesn't fit the hands of the practitioner in the clinic at the time? If it's too small, then it's going to burst. If it's too big, then it's not going to do its job properly. It's not going to be sealed. And, you know, germs could still fester out. As we add new facilities, I have to ask, has our capacity increased? Have we somehow, because it's not as though the budgetary allocation for healthcare is being increased as we increase the number of facilities. And it's not as though our long-term budget plans had capital expenditure which is being replaced with the ongoing expenditure to run these facilities. No, it seems as though when we get a new administration building and a new campus, hospital campus, it's the first of its kind apparently, because we use the word campus, according to the Prime Minister. And of course, the opposition, then government at the time, the People's Partnership, they had the Couva Hospital, etc., etc. We keep adding, and it's not as though we're stopping the process of adding to kind of make sure our supply chains and supply lines are able to catch up and our maintenance, etc., is able to catch up before we start more capital expenditure. You know, that seems to be continuing to be ongoing. So are we actually increasing capacity in the country every time we add a new facility? Or is it smoke and mirrors, and what we're doing is the pie is the same size and we're just cutting it into smaller slices so it stretches. It looks as though that everybody is going to get a serving, but what we don't necessarily understand is we're going to get a smaller serving. Because the one factor of healthcare in the public health system that more or less has been sustained is to make certain aspects free, right? You go to the public healthcare system for free healthcare. Of course, depending on what it is you want to do, you might have to wait a long time to get it done. So the alternative is to go private, where the wait times obviously are not going to be as long. The question I have now is, have we reached a point where, as the economic forces tie our hands, and economic forces is not about money per se, and if you money the great evil, you remove it and then we will solve the economic forces. Economic forces is actually really a way to classify human behavior given certain circumstances of how resources are allocated for any sort of service or product provided by a provider and by the consumer. How will they behave? As we make more facilities and we try to make it more universally accessible, does that mean that quality is going to be more and more compromised? And the more we open facilities, the lower the standards are going to be. And is this situation in Port of Spain General just the latest example? Because there probably are other examples, right? But it's the latest and most stark and most tragic example of that phenomenon occurring. Because one could argue before, I mean, the Prime Minister himself had a great anecdote, and we'll get more into the specifics later, of the work done for his own family at Port of Spain General, I believe. Right? They have had a history of enough good outcomes that at the end of the day, its reputation was good enough for the public to be satisfied, at least to some degree. I have had my doubts of certain things for quite some time, based on anecdotal experiences of people I know, some of whom I question if they had to die at all. Fortunately, they weren't babies. But now, the thing about it is, coming into this situation, we have to ask ourselves, what changed in Port of Spain? Is it a blip? Something that, not to downplay it, but happened by chance? Or is it a symptom of a new systemic problem? Or perhaps an old one that somehow has been covered up through the efforts of individuals within the system for as long as possible until something finally slipped through the cracks. But at the end of the day, bear that in mind. Everything that the government does has an opportunity cost. So just because it looks as though we have more healthcare doesn't actually mean we have more healthcare. Just because it looks as though we have more education, ooh, they open a next school. But then what about all the schools that are complaining, we can't reopen, it's not safe, the work done was subpar, the facilities are not working, when are the actual repairs going to be done so we could reopen and get out of this church hall that we're sharing with another school, and our students are set up to fail in a high stress environment because before they even reach their teenage years, they have their first exam that will be instrumental in determining the rest of their life. We have children as young as 11, and at least in one case 10 that I know of, although he did it successfully. I guess that's how he was allowed to do it so young. We put that amount of pressure on our young people then, and yet we have too many children across the country, maybe because it's in the country and not in the main urban population centers where ministers and MPs tend to congregate. It's not a problem. But healthcare is one of those things where at the end of the day, there's no real way to sugarcoat and to mask bad outcomes, because bad outcomes don't come 15 years down the line, or 10 years down the line, or 5 years down the line. In this case, bad outcomes happen in weeks. So, universality, affordability, quality. What is the basis of the model of our healthcare? Which one are we sacrificing? And is that the one that we, the people of Trinidad and Tobago, want? All right. Let's actually get into it now. Let's start off today's daily review. And I already started to speak in depth about our healthcare system in general, but now to go into specifics, I did not expect this story to continue in the manner that it has, because usually something happens and we wait for updates, new developments in a pre-existing story. That is to say, more information about what happened. But we're not just necessarily getting more information about what happened that we knew of, we're also getting more information of things that happened that we are now, as the public, discovering. That is to say, we the public are still learning about deaths in the NICU, in Port of Spain in general, that happened at around the same time. Because not only has it come to light that there were twins who passed away at around a similar time period, under similar circumstances. That is to say, the time period is close enough. February 20th, I believe, in the case of one of the twins. But apparently it's two sets of twins, because one of the original 7 babies was a twin whose other sibling also passed away. So that means we have now discovered essentially 3 new deaths. One set of twins and the sibling that we did not know of another set of twins whose parents are technically included in the original 7. At this point, the thing is, I don't know if I should be surprised that I'm surprised, or I should have expected this to happen. Because you don't expect, we hear about a tragedy, and then we hear about the tragedy expanding, and then not too long after, we haven't even reached the next week, we hear about the tragedy expanding again, and now I'm just waiting for the 3rd, 4th, 5th shoe to drop, because the other shoe has long dropped, to find out what else potentially could be uncovered. And this went back to what I said about the investigations into this situation. PAO is investigating NICU and the prenatal unit, etc. But then to some extent, depending on how far it goes with regards to Port of Spain in general, at the very minimum, we will now have to ask, should they follow all the trails of breadcrumbs, even if it leads outside of the units directly responsible with what we know of currently? Because should we be concerned about other developments that we may or may not know? One of the things with regards to Trinidad and Tobago, technically yes, around the world, but my co-host always says, with regards to the murder rate, it's that we know of. Even the ASP has said, with regards to certain crimes, we know the statistics only of the examples that are known. Whether it is domestic violence, whether it is drugs intercepted or interdicted, or illegal guns interdicted. Kidnappings, child endangerment, We only know of the cases that we know of. We also know that the medical profession, not the public health service, the profession at the very minimum may include individuals to some capacity who are willing to run cover for the states. We know this because of what happened with regards to the 2 prisoners that died in custody of the prisons, where alternate medical theories of their deaths were presented or attempted to be looked into that go against what independent pathologists found to be, in their opinion, the cause of death to a significant degree. Because one has to wonder, how is it that the official state cause of death for the first prisoner was a heart attack, and then the independent pathologist, who used to work for the state, if my memory is correct, this is Mr. Devines, who constantly complained about the state's lack of resources for the Forensic Science Center. His independent assessment was, and again, he was good enough to work for the state, was polytrauma, blunt force trauma. So it's not directly connected to Port of Spain General and the Public Health Service. But it does speak to a small chink in the armor of the profession. And then now the Prime Minister, he's back and he is weighed in. And I understand his point of view. Now, first of all, he has expressed condolences and regret. Great. He has also said, we will leave no stone unturned, which technically I could appreciate as something he has to say. Unfortunately, on a practical level, given that they say things like that about everything all the time, and the results that we get from unfortunate situations tend to not always be satisfactory, to say the least. When he says it again, it's like when the abuser says, I'm sorry after hitting you. At what point are we not going to take it as seriously as they want us to take it? Right? Now, I'm not saying that everything the Prime Minister does that ends up with a bad outcome is intentional. Or rather, everything that the government does that the Prime Minister has to apologize for. I mean, that's a better way to put it. Right? Is intentional. But he himself needs to understand the unfortunate, damned if you do, damned if you don't, the double-edged sword. You should apologize. But at some point, if you have to say the same things over and over again, and we don't see improvements of preventative measures to prevent it from reaching to another apology again, then we're not going to take you as seriously. We're going to discredit your words, and we're going to look at your credibility and start to wonder, those who are objectively neutral and even to some extent partially biased for you are going to look at you and start to wonder, to what extent do I have to reassess you in a negative light? But then there also comes the point, and this is more of a communication strategy thing. This is not necessarily like a hard and fast criticism of the Prime Minister. But he goes on to chastise, apparently, those who are trying to politicize the tragedy, like the opposition calling for the resignation or the firing of the Minister of Health, which both myself and my co-host Keaton Shah 2 days ago on Tuesday thought that was out of bounds. That was unnecessary. That's not called for, at least not yet. And the thing is, he's being defensive, and I understand, because the opposition is not right in this case. It's premature to call for the Minister of Health's resignation/firing at this point in time. But, Mr. Prime Minister, I would caution you, you shouldn't say it. Leave that for me to say, because he's your Minister of Health. It's similar to when you defended earlier and said, well, you know, she's the person for the job, so we have to give her 100% support. It's like, of course you're going to support her. You picked her, and if she falls flat on her face, you are at the top of the ladder. Responsibility goes up. authority, to some extent, goes down. I have authority over you, but I have more responsibility than you, people who are underneath me. And as Prime Minister, there is nobody except maybe the President, to some extent, in some capacity. There's nobody else above you than that. So the responsibility stops at you. But you being defensive about it could appear disingenuous. And unfortunately, you have set yourself up, and I've said this multiple times before, it's not about how sincere, appropriate, or in good faith you make the statement. It's about the perception, and the fact of the matter is far too many people are not going to give you the benefit of the doubt anymore. So you defending the Minister of Health is functionary at best. Yes, it will help your base. Yes, it might stave off some of the people in the middle, but your detractors and critics are going to double down because you defended him. Now, if someone who I assume I am objective, when I defend whether a member of the opposition or a member of the government or a member of a third party, political party, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, however you want to classify them, it's different. Of course, if a UNC member defended Terence Yalsing, that will be even stronger than an outside third party like myself. But if you, who are basically the person that selected him, supported him, chose him, relies on him, defends him, it will, yes, it is the confidence of the Prime Minister, I get that. But we've reached the point where the honorable part of all the titles, they're just, ceremonially said. I don't think a lot of people really fundamentally, believe it. They hold respect to the office, not necessarily to the office holder. And sometimes it's hard to differentiate the speech one between the other. So I would caution, let other people counterattack for you when your opponents do rubbish. You should just be focusing, because to some extent you're continuing the political cycle by defending the minister. You're taking away from the fact that you should be trying to appear, at the very least, if we want to be cynical, that's how we're going to phrase it. But obviously it should be more than just for appearance's sake. You should be doing everything you can to ensure that people perceive you to be trying to fix this issue and not taking any time from the initial stages of your involvement to defend the status quo. Because it's adding fuel to concerns of what are they hiding? What are they not telling us? Now, I make it sound maybe bigger than it is, but the principle, the sentiments, I believe, more or less are there. All right. I've spoken a lot about this one topic. Let's take a break, then we'll switch gears. At some point at the top of the hour, I am hopefully going to have time to get into Israel, Iran. Maybe, maybe not, but we also have other topics, scheduled for today for the daily review. We'll get to that after this on Talking Point.
Fan Zone, Your reliable, authentic supplier has just gotten better. You can now visit our website www.fanzonett.com for your authentic wear and collectibles. The only place where you can use both your Visa debit and credit cards. Visit our website fanzonett.com to make your purchase today.
Take some time for yourself or spend some time with the family at Sandy Point Village Hotel. Enjoy our various studio and suite apartments, self-contained with their own kitchenettes and Wi-Fi. We also have our famous 100-foot swimming pool and our beachfront restaurant, The Steak and Lobster Grill. And our location in Crown Point puts us near the center of activity from the nylon pool to the local nightlife. Call us and make your reservations at 639-8533, 389-2378 or email us at sandypointvillagehotel@gmail.com.
The off-air banter. Anyway, let's not sidetrack with that. Moving on with the daily review, one of the things that I wanted to comment on to a limited degree, because I think this is a very complex situation of which it's to some extent immature in certain respects, so there's no final resolution that could be offered. But you would have probably already seen there have been a lot of news stories in the papers over the course of the week about threats made against Barrackpore East Secondary School. And basically what I wanted to say, or caution people from being quick to judge the situation, because it's not as simple as it sounds. That said, I do think I would have, if, and I probably never will be, in a position to handle a crisis of this nature, I may have handled it differently, although the result might not have necessarily been, on a practical level, that much better. Because at the end of the day, threats were made, whereas, you know, I assume it's anonymous, otherwise we would have heard of arrest already. So to some degree, some measures were taken. Threats were made, emails were sent, I believe, to teachers, and etc. About threats against teachers and students, you know, claiming to essentially become a school shooter and to attack the school either the Monday or the Tuesday. Of course, now we're at the Thursday. The attack has not happened yet. Tutor has called out the situation and says that the school should have been closed. Students should not have been, you know, necessarily allowed to go back to school. Teachers, they're calling it, you know, well, they have safety concerns. And I understand that. When someone makes the claim that they want to make history as the top school shooter in Trinidad and Tobago, you know, that's a hell of a threat. Now, ironically, at times, sometimes when somebody says that in advance, you do have to wonder how serious are they. Because if they really wanted to do it, they probably would have just done it and left, you know, maybe a suicide note or left a timed delivery, a package, a video, whatever, right? Or they would have posted their message in whatever format as it was happening. But they gave advance warning, they even gave dates. The thing about it is, I understand tutors' concern, right? They don't like the fact that the Ministry of Education decided not to close the school. My issue is this: until you figure out who made the threats, that threat will hang over that school till the end of time, technically speaking. And you could close the school for a month. If you haven't found the person that made the threat, and you haven't put sufficient security apparatus to prevent the threat, and to be honest, to some extent, it'll be very hard to 100% guarantee that security will prevent something like this. You know, at some point, the person that made the threat just has to wait. Wait for everything to subside. Wait for the police response and the security to have to be relocated. Because a month, 2 months, 3 months, a year later, people are going to say, it was an empty threat. We can't justify this heightened level of security, blah, 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 blah. Are we going to put metal detectors and have an army of security and police officers at Barrackpore East Secondary School for the next 7 to 10 years? I don't think so. So until the person is found, that will always hang over the head. So closing the school for a day or two, to some extent, is not going to solve the problem. Although it is low-hanging fruit, one could argue, well, at the very least, just do it for the Monday and Tuesday, the dates that the threats claim to be targeting, but then they could have done it on a Wednesday. Why not? Okay, they didn't live up. Either way, we know that they already have not lived up to the dates that they threatened to attack. That doesn't mean that they're still not going to carry out the attack. Now, one of the things that I think the Ministry of Education should have done was, they should have closed the school at the very least on Monday. The minister herself should have called in the PTA as well as parents, right? So maybe you initially contact the PTA if it has a working PTA, a functional working PTA, not just a PTA name that doesn't really do anything. And maybe use the PTA to help disseminate their communications. But either way, you meet with all the parents and you consult with them and you tell them, this is what we intend to do. What are your complaints? What do you want us to do? Not that you're going to, they are entitled to have their intentions 100% implemented as they want it, because the authority needs to do proper risk assessment. There might be some gung-ho parents that's like, I don't care, my child needs an education, because that's the cost. The cost is disrupting a child's education who has to undergo the second test before the age of 17 that will then determine the rest of their life. And all of this from Form 1 to Form 5 is the preparation for that set of exams. So consult with the people, maybe for that school, bring back online learning for a week, a month, whatever. Maybe ask them what security measures you might like to see. Try and determine with the Ministry of National Security what long-term security measures could be put in place, as well as perhaps maybe talk to them, update them about the whole situation, the investigation, etc., etc. And to some extent, parents should have, well, I guess legally speaking, they had a choice anyway, but the school and the ministry should have encouraged parents, look, it's up to you if you want to send your child in or not. But like I said, online classes are not perfect, but it could have been a solution in short term. So there are a lot of different things that could have been done. I don't know to what extent it was done. I do know that, you know, parents had concerns and children were still going to school. I understand the idea behind it to put a halt to education for what might be an empty threat, because it is an over-the-top ridiculous threat, although the stakes are too severe to not take it seriously. But the opportunity cost to the children's education is probably more severe than we think. But it is what it is. Now we kind of have to see. Really and truly, the only thing that will make me comfortable at this stage is if the perpetrator is caught, so that at least we know that this situation is put to bed and should not actually happen. All right, moving on. Something that I found interesting. The headline for this article was having a term limit for the opposition leader, which I found interesting because usually when you think about term limits, the first thing you think about in this country should be prime minister, right? Because that's the person with the actual power. A term limit for president doesn't really matter that much. I mean, I don't think we've ever had a president go to 3 terms, right? Think about it, I could be wrong. But prime ministers, at the end of the day, they haven't necessarily had 3 consecutive terms, but they have played tennis. You know, I'm prime minister, now you're prime minister, now I'm prime minister again, now you're prime minister, and in theory could go on very long. Now, in the example of Dr. Keith Rowley, potentially he could go on to a 3rd term, but he would be getting there in years. And I don't know if, you know, how appropriate it would be for him to retire midway through a term and leave us, you know, after, if the public votes for him and the PNM wins, with him at the top of the ticket, how appropriate it would be for him to retire and then we get somebody else as prime minister for part or maybe all or the majority of that term. Now, the term limit proposition was by former Contractors Association President Mike A. Joseph. He made this to the National Advisory Committee on Constitutional Reform. He also included the president, I believe, as well as the prime minister, right? And I think there are more pluses than minuses in this, because when you think about it, on one hand, continuity of governance is a very important thing. You don't want leadership to change, even if it's the same party. if the leadership changes, the agendas might change. Now, in theory, one would think, particularly with all of the structure and organization that the PNM has, that they would have continuity in part because of all of that structure, right? But it's not guaranteed. The problem is what we see now with the opposition leader and the prime minister essentially having a de facto cartel, even if they're not actually collaborating for it. That's essentially what it looks like for the last 3 general elections, or 2.5, I guess you could say, right? We kind of knew or expected Mr. Manning to not achieve victory against, well, whoever went up against him. It did ultimately take a coalition to beat him. But we're more or less reaching a 3rd election for this particular ticket currently. So I think this is something that should be done as part of constitutional reform. I think that the negatives right now are outweighed by the benefits, because while continuity of governance is important, like I said, if our politics was functioning with some degree of effectiveness, proficiency, we could overcome that easier than we could overcome the situation where we have people hanging on for the sake of hanging on. That's what it seems like. And we should just, at the end of the day, 2 terms, whether, is a decade. That's a long time. And generally speaking, it's not as though every political leader that we have in TNT are under the age of 50, where 10 years onto their career is not going to, leave them at a particular point that might be a little too close to retirement. Both political leaders of the 2 parties in Parliament are over 70. Even 1 more term is 5 more years. Right now in America, they have been questioned since his first term about to what extent Joe Biden will last, and the American public will be saddled with a vice presidential candidate who more or less was told by her own party's electors in their primaries, no, we don't want you. And then, as I said with regards to the Kittrall situation, it might come to the fact where she will become president of the United States by default if Joe Biden cannot physically make it through the next term if he wins the next election. How ethical would that be? Because, again, Kamala Harris did not win the support of Democratic voters in Democratic primaries. They wanted Joe. She just is the running mate that he selected for whatever reason. So, will we actually get there with regards to reform? I don't know about that one. I don't know about that one. Of course, like I said, it comes with its own issues. All right, moving on. This is the last topic in the daily review, and we'll save the other topics tomorrow if necessary. Speaking about elected officials, there has been a proposed alternate means to select commissioners of police and deputy commissioners of police. And this is from former police officer Barry Garcia. He's saying, well, we should elect them. I don't know how I feel about that. I do understand the sentiment. Right now, it seems as though the process is completely flawed. And no matter how independent they're supposed to be, we saw what happened to the last independent-minded commissioner of police. He was removed for what I believe to be, I genuinely believe to be, but I have no evidence for, because in part, the accusation made against him, nothing has necessarily been revealed. But I do believe that it's a combination of his conduct and potential continued facilitation of internal corruption in the police service with regards to firearm users licenses, potentially, right? But also, I am very, very, very confident in the fact that political considerations by the current administration was the main factor in wanting to remove him. And I also believe that political considerations of the current administration is the main factor of why earlier is not going to be as ceremoniously changed out as her predecessor substantive commissioner of police. Should these posts be elected? The problem is we're still not going to necessarily get a meritocracy. Think about it. I already have complained about elected officials not necessarily being elected on merit. I have complained in part because you should know that elections at times become popularity contests, right? Sometimes those with merit are the popular candidate, and sometimes those that could talk the best, but not necessarily, walk the walk. They could only talk the talk. And we have a lot of politicians that could walk a lot of walk. Hey, the Minister of National Security could talk the talk, sorry. We just have questions if he could walk the walk. And he was a former police officer, attorney at law, now Minister of National Security. A lot of the public are not satisfied. So I understand it might be an imperfect solution that might give us a better outcome, but it still might not be good enough. But good enough but better, is that the threshold by which we should maybe make this change? I don't know. I just know that the Police Service Commission is doing a very good job of making us think they're not independent. Let's take a break. When we come back, I have a clip about Iran, Israel, and just a basic thought of mine that I believe will kind of express my point of view that this is not a one-side, pick-a-side situation. This is a lot more complex than that. Stay tuned to WSN's Talking About Everywhere.
Coming soon to WESN.
Pastor J, I want to get a tattoo.
You really want
to me. Respond to me how you would respond to me.
The first question I'll ask is why?
Controversial taboo topics.
We get so consumed by church, we forget that we have to live the life of being a Christian outside of the Sunday.
Like you say,
services.
we think going to a service makes us a Christian.
Exactly.
Yeah, right. So here we are about to hear the second time Pastor J wanted to take a tattoo.
Would have been late last year and early this year.
Oh gosh.
Hope Unfiltered podcast with Pastor J and Ren. Coming soon to WESN.
This is Face of Sports, WESN Content Capital. How you felt about the kiss on the lip?
That's the business. I'm nothing to do with that.
I find that was distasteful.
The national senior team, whether you like it or not, that is the model for all other teams to follow.
I'm assuming that the regional requirement may be a much stricter requirement.
This is not about Pro League and Super League. This is a league run by the Normalization Committee that I'm responsible for.
Nobody expected FIFA to fund this arrangement.
If we don't get a professional attitude towards this, we are doomed for failure.
You break the balance, trip the leg, control the body.
They ain't gonna stand put forever.
Why you want the Chiefs to lose so? Why you want the Chiefs to lose so?
They already have two. Lamar don't
Why?
have.
You're jealous because you know the Chiefs getting closer to the Patriots. Let's go to the last part.
No,
of the
not no.
Let's go to the last part.
Welcome back to Talking Point, ladies and gentlemen. And one of the things that we should be well aware of, Ukraine, Russia taught us that we are not immune to conflicts that happen, in other parts of the world. Now, in the past, the war in the Middle East didn't necessarily impact the major oil-producing nations that directly contributed to our economy, or rather, I should say indirectly, or both. The thing about it is, though, is that Israel's place in the Middle East makes the situation a lot more precarious, and we always have to look out now to see if anything is going to happen that might cause something similar to the effects of Ukraine-Russia when that started, that affected price of food, that affected global inflation, and with a retaliatory strike from Iran, there is the threat that the conflict will expand in the region. And let's not forget, major oil-producing nations are technically in the middle of those two nations. We have some clips from the BBC and from our affiliate France 24. Let's run the clip, because it's time to cue this.
Offensive. The Israeli foreign minister has written, he says, to 32 countries around the world, urging them to impose even more sanctions against the Islamic Republic of Iran. The foreign minister, Israel Katz, posted this on X, formerly Twitter, saying Israel, that Iran has to be stopped now before it is too late. And that is the message that's also being sounded by leading senior military officials here in Israel, including the Chief of Staff, Lieutenant General Herzi Halevi. He said that Israel would have to respond. He made the comments by visiting the Nevatim air base in southern Israel, where some of Iran's missiles did actually hit in the early hours of Sunday morning, although Israel says there was limited damage. Israel says only a handful of missiles actually got through. Of the 350 suicide drones and cruise and ballistic missiles which were fired by Iran. Iran says its retaliatory strike was in response to Israel's attack on its diplomatic compound in the Syrian capital Damascus on April the 1st. Iran's foreign minister Amir Abdullahian has reiterated that message in a telephone conversation with the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, saying that Iran acted in legitimate self-defense. Iran, too, is calling for restraint, saying it doesn't want this to escalate into a wider war.
Just days after Iranian rockets lit up the skies over Israel, both the U.S. and the EU are vowing to respond with new penalties for Tehran.
I fully expect that we will take additional sanctions action against Iran in the coming days.
I will send to the External Action Service the request to start the necessary work related to these sanctions.
New sanctions come in addition to an already sweeping set of American and European penalties against Iran, tied to its connections to terrorism, its human rights record, and its nuclear program. When then U.S. President Donald Trump withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal in 2018, his administration reimposed U.S. sanctions that had been eased under the agreement and added new sanctions as well, which have continued under Joe Biden. The sanctions include a ban on nearly all U.S. trade with Iran, the blocking of the Iranian government's assets in the U.S., and the prohibition of U.S. foreign assistance and arms sales. The penalties have also targeted thousands of people and companies, both in Iran and in foreign countries. For its part, the EU has a range of sanctions already in place, including restrictions on trade, travel bans, and the freezing of assets. Last year, the EU banned the export of parts Iran uses to make drones, some of which have been used by Russia during its invasion of Ukraine, and also used by Tehran in its attack on Israel over the weekend. In recent years, the combined effect of U.S.-EU sanctions have had a crushing impact on Iran's economy, effectively putting a cap on crucial oil exports and causing inflation to soar. Meanwhile, with a nuclear deal in tatters, Iran is said to have edged closer than ever to having nuclear capability.
Of course, you are following every twist and turn of this escalating crisis between Israel and Iran. How would you describe this particular moment?
Well, the Israelis crossed the red line by attacking Iran's diplomatic compound in Damascus. And then the Iranians crossed another red line by attacking Israeli soil. And so we're at a very precarious, in fact, dangerous moment where we're likely to see an Israeli retaliatory strike for Iran's retaliatory strike. And so the vicious cycle is likely to continue, unfortunately.
This moment seems to underline the dangerous differences in perception. Iran is saying this was a very limited, a very calibrated strike. It caused limited damage. For Israel, of course, it was a reckless strike which breached its security, and there must be a retaliation. And that is what is going to fuel this conflict, is it not?
Absolutely. And in fact, I think we do see that the Iranians did hold back. They had to somehow retaliate for the attack on their embassy compound. And so, as far as they're concerned, deterrence has been reestablished. And now they're saying that if Israel attacks Iran again, or Iranian interests or personnel, there will be more of this kind of retaliatory strike. Of course, Netanyahu's political predicament inside Israel don't allow for restraint. And we've seen Netanyahu have a penchant for overreaction. He's also under pressure from the right flank of his own cabinet. And so, unfortunately, as you mentioned, we're at a precarious and very dangerous moment.
Indeed, and the speculation now seems to be that even though there are disagreements within the war cabinet, and we are hearing that the cabinet may meet again today, some of the former military generals saying we should retaliate now. Others saying let's build our international and our regional coalition first, because they are emphasizing that this coalition, the support Israel is receiving at this moment, that matters too.
Absolutely. And also crucial is the support that the United States will give to Israel, both diplomatically and militarily. And we've heard very loud and clear messages coming out of Washington that the United States would not assist Israel on an attack on Iranian soil. And so I think that's also given some pause to Israeli military commanders. Do they really want to go it alone, knowing that Iran has this so-called axis of resistance that it can activate when it feels very threatened?
It's a much complicated situation, and we ourselves might necessarily think. One of the things that we need to understand with regards to politics in the region is even if the other countries in the regions might have various degrees of animosity against each other. Like, for example, 1990-1991, Iraq invaded Kuwait. Saudi Arabia was afraid of Iraq continuing its aggression and invading their own country, and thus subsequently looked at Iraq as an enemy. But what happened in the lead up to the Gulf War was Iraq, part of their strikes was directed not at bases in Saudi Arabia or at civilian populations in Saudi Arabia, but at Israeli targets in Israel, hoping to bait Israel to respond, in which case the American government actually successfully did enough to prevent Israel from striking back on Iraq, because there was a very real concern that any involvement by Israel, despite the fact that the rest of the Gulf looked at Iraq as an aggressor and thus were part of the coalition to liberate Kuwait, any strikes by Israel at that time would have potentially undermined the 1990-1991 coalition and caused Gulf states to band together in defense of a fellow Islamic state, even though it's an aggressor. That's to tell you how complicated things were then. Now we've come to a point where Iraq is no more a buffer state for Saudi Arabia towards Iran. Now Iran is seemingly becoming a little bit more friendly with Saudi Arabia. To what extent is that true to the rest of its neighbors? And even if it's not true, attacks from Israel all the way into Iran, even if Iran's neighbors don't look at Iran's intentions kindly, might be forced due to the religious politics of the region to side against Israel, whether diplomatically or militarily. It's a great political international complicate the situation. And the Western powers don't want it to get to escalating military situation because they're supporting Israel, but they also have their financial and diplomatic ties and political ties to other countries in the Middle East. It gets complicated. One of the other things that makes it complicated is just geographical distance. Let's take a look at this map that we have of the Middle East to highlight this point. Of course, Israel and Iran highlighted in red. Underneath Iraq and Jordan, that big mass that is not labeled, that should be Saudi Arabia there. But notice Israel, to reach Iran, has to go through at least 2 countries. Or maybe if they just cut across Saudi Arabia from the south or Turkey in the north, 2 options that are not really feasible, in my opinion. The response of all of those countries in between, they could militarily intervene, they could protest violations of their sovereign airspace, any attempts of Israel to cut across. Israel doesn't have the navy to go all the way around. And any conflict fought between those 2 nations, well, we might see collateral damage to the neighbors, who, again, might protest or might become involved militarily. Now, at the end of the day, I do believe that Iran was more or less justified. They were retaliating. However, to some extent, Israel could say, well, we were retaliating for Iran's support of Hezbollah, of Hamas, etc., etc., which I have issues with how Israel conducted their operations in Gaza and the consequences to Palestinians. I don't share similar sentiments of pity and hope for protection for Hamas, the entity. That's different. The thing about it is, right now, we're in a vicious cycle, and I said this before, it's the Hatfields and McCoys. They hate each other for the violence they most recently afflicted, first and most of all. Second, for the history of violence. But the third part is the original violence that none of them probably even remember or even knew. It is so far beyond generations now. Even before the state of Israel existed, conflict and tensions between Jews and Muslims in the Holy Land was real. And the thing is, it is true. The current course of action that Israel undertook, which I thought was quite ridiculous and pointless, will send droves of young men into Hamas. But what a lot of people don't realize is it works both ways. Aggression shown towards Israel sends loads of young Israelis into the Israeli military, and it militarizes their mindset. And they themselves have their own fundamental religious, ultra-conservative believers who will see this fuel added to the fire and will respond in the same way, with a lack of care and consideration for people on the other side. Now, we know that there are those within Palestine and Israel who actually are trying to work together and fight for change and peace. But as violence is inflicted one to the other, both Palestinians as well as other Muslims and Israelis are becoming more and more militarized, more and more aggressive, and give less and less consideration to the other side. And I showed you the map. And the map included Saudi Arabia in the middle. Of course, Kuwait would be there. There's oil in other parts of the Middle East. That Gulf, right, to the east, to the northeast and east of Saudi Arabia, a lot of important oil shipping comes through there, right, in that strait. We already had issues with Houthi rebels in Yemen. Of course, the Red Sea, which is not too far from Gaza, to the north end of the Red Sea is the Suez Canal, which we saw what happened when the Evergreen ship was stuck there for a week. This is a convergence of important economic factors to the rest of the world, and that's why we in Trinidad and Tobago need to be aware of it. And I understand people want to take sides, and a lot of people want to take Palestine's side in TNT. There's a difference between Palestine's side and Hamas' side, at least in my mind, first of all, right? I have no problem wanting to see the people of Palestine safe and prosper and not being attacked. But we also have to understand that it's more complicated than just, ooh, we want peace. Because we're looking at a situation where two sides hate each other to the point of not caring about the harm they inflict upon one another and what it means towards the retaliations that will come back at them. Israel seemingly did not even care enough about the hostages, their own people, that they continued aggressive military action, which in my mind would have more or less precluded those hostages' lives to be endangered, if not forfeit, because it's an obvious low-hanging fruit to retaliate for the attacks that Israel inflicted after Hamas attacked Israel. So who's in the right? So when we want to say we need to tell the UN and the international community what to do, I think most people take a very oversimplified view based on their own bias, and it doesn't actually get us to a solution. Because a solution is not about just saying that so-and-so needs to be condemned. Both sides have been condemned throughout history at one point or the other. At one point, Israel was ostracized from the international community, and it made a partnership with apartheid South Africa at one point. So that has already happened. Of course, terrorist groups have already been condemned. Iran has already been sanctioned. These things, sanctions do work, but not in the way we think they're supposed to work. Their actual purpose is to suppress growth in economies for bad actors to prevent them from having the resources to continue to persecute their neighbors or their own population. But it comes with a consequence to the people involved in that nation, the citizens itself. It has a lot of unintended consequences, I would argue. It's not necessarily a silver bullet. It does what it does well, not what we think it does. All of the things that the West and the international community have tried to intervene has not worked. Because it's not just about telling two sides that they have to have peace. It's about preventing two sides that at this point they've reached a level of hatred that we don't see very often in 2024. Hatred that they will not necessarily set aside just because we tell them that they have to. One way or the other, they're going to get back at it unless we figure out a practical way to force them to stop. In some ways, it parallels our own crime situation here, where we have to do more than just ask the criminals to stop committing violence and saying, well, we're going to double down on our efforts that we're already carrying out that already does not work. As our murder rate increases here, so too the death toll increases over there. And we in TNT just have to hope that our local crime situation does not undermine our economy to the point of it collapsing, and the international situation in the Middle East does not cause the oil and gas market to be so compromised that it negatively affects our supply chains, which are all importations, and our own revenue earning capacity from our own energy sector. And I will leave that there. And who knows how many people that I may have angered in that last set of sections who believe that their side is the right side. Well, similar to our politics. Why do we have to pick sides? Isn't the human side the right side? Or in our case, the nation side, the right side? All right. Let's take a quick break, then we'll open the phone lines. This is Talking Point. Stay tuned.
The newest book is here, Closer to the Church, the debut novel by author and former mayor Louis Lee Singh, available at all the Home Store branches, Barataria, West Mall, Shogunas and C3 San Fernando. Paper-based bookshop 10 Nook Avenue, St. Anne's, WESN 30A Gattaca Street, Woodbrook, Metropolitan Bookshop, Ariapita Avenue, Woodbrook, and all RIK bookstores nationwide. Available online as paperback on Amazon.com and Kindle for e-readers. For more info, call 628-5835 or 389-6504. Also available from author Louis Lee Singh, I Used to Live in Heaven, Letters to My Granddaughters, and Local Government in Trinidad, Conspiracy Against the People. The home of Caribbean content is growing, and we welcome you to be a part of the #1 platform for young personalities who are driven to make a positive impact in society. As we continue to reach every corner of Trinidad and Tobago through our daily broadcasts, our social media pages, or through our 75+ digital billboards across the nation, contact us to learn about our competitive rates via marketing at wesncc.com or call us at 628-5835. WESN Content Capital, television with a difference.
And we're back. Now we'll open up the phone lines. You can have your say. I know to some extent the whole situation with the unfortunate deaths in Port-au-Prince in general is not necessarily something that I think a lot of people want to even think about. And then on top of that, we just had the murder of a 4-year-old Amara. When all of these things get compounded, I myself have a hard time trying to just keep up emotionally, mentally, with everything that has happened. But call and have your say. Of course, you could speak about, Iran, Israel. You could speak about all of the other topics that I've said. I didn't touch on the new legislation to bring in our refugees back from Syria and all of those implications, which are many. But we do have a caller from Diego Martin. Caller, good morning. You're on air.
Good morning, Mr. Paul.
Morning.
I want to talk about the TPS disposition with respect to a number of deaths in the country.
Okay.
And I'm going to identify they say it's 11 deaths at the hospital. They had the Paria deaths, the 4. We had the Wassa death, and then we had the Naikwan death. And I'm not hearing from the police if they are part of the investigation. Are they deliberately staying away from it? Because, we have to classify the death if it's homicide, if it's corporate manslaughter, if it is manslaughter, if it is negligent homicide. And the police has to have an active role. Are they being instructed not to be part of it? Because as far as I'm concerned, and my memory is probably not as good as not, they did not deliberately take part in the Paria issue. And the fact that the commissioner said it is corporate manslaughter, I would expect the police to go inside there to see if that is true, to see if it's deliberate. But if there is a hands approach, how can we know? They're not saying anything. They're promoting themselves without taking an active part in all of the deaths. As a citizen, I want to know the police is the major security organization with us to protect and serve. And if we see something happening in a corporate organization, we have to know. For example, if somebody died in a house, the police take an active part. They come see what is going on and things like that. If something happens in the hospital, okay, they go to the death certificate. But if you see something abnormal, as in the 12 deaths of the babies, you have to be part of it. The other issue is, I want to basically to respond to the Prime Minister respond to Moninal in the sense that Dr. Moninal, Dr. Moninal asked him certain questions and he reflected, and I believe he said something he will not respond with respect to Moninal, and he wants Moninal to answer something he has in the court. I want to ask him outside Moninal, and hopefully Dr. Moninal will hear what I'm saying. And I'm hoping when Moninal responds to that court issue, he doesn't give us the AG Amor protocol in Miami, doesn't put into the public space or the courts an affidavit that was untrue. And it doesn't go to the court and say he has a memory lapse. I'll go and have a nice day. I'm being facetious.
Caller, sorry, what exactly, I'm not following, what exactly with regards to Dr. Munilal?
it, I'm hoping that Dr. Munilal's presentation to the court is not something as that of Mr. A.G. Amor in the Miami court, which was proved to be something that was false. So all I'm saying to Dr. Munal, do not go down that road. I'm going to have a nice day.
Okay. Yeah, one of the things that bothers me is how many allegations politicians could throw out, right? But of course, they don't want to be accused of libel, so they don't always give any specific accusations or provide specific context. And even in the case of Dr. Milal talking about the Prime Minister's travel, some of it, yes, I have questions, but you know, to some extent, I need context provided. Why is this too much? What should it be? How much, you know, is reasonable in cases like this, etc., etc.? Because, you know, some people do call out the Prime Minister of the People's Partnership used to utilize helicopter flights quite frequently. Our Prime Minister currently, yes, he is our Prime Minister. I do not mean that identifying any sort of identity with, you know, affiliation to the current administration. He is the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago. That means to say, for all of the UNC supporters, he's your Prime Minister too right now. He doesn't seemingly take the helicopter rides. So maybe one could say the money he saved from not using a helicopter to go all over the country and to Tobago, maybe then it's justified he uses that for international travel. Or maybe both were wrong because both, you know, wasted taxpayers' dollars on things that they should not have spent it on. But I do find that the most annoying thing is allegations are thrown out and they are never resolved. So then it reaches the point where everybody's just crying wolf, really. It's hard for me to take you seriously. Oh my gosh, look at what so-and-so did. Why? You never answered for what your people did. You never even got us a resolution to some of the accusations you made about your political opponents. So why should I take this new accusation seriously? You can't resolve anything that you bring up, so what's the point? But I digress. With regards to the what would be generally perceived to be accidental deaths or unfortunate natural deaths, I'm not entirely sure how you would classify the technical classification of the deaths of the 11 babies in Port of Spain in general. The thing is, the police generally would need something to give them cause to investigate, that it would be criminal charges, right? And I do believe that the investigation files have already been sent to DPP. The police were involved initially, as was OSHA. I'm not sure if we ever really heard what came out of the police investigation because, again, we could never get information about ongoing investigations because apparently the police are allergic. The irony, of course, is the only time they break their rules is when they do so very, very, very foolishly. But we never actually see good judgment to say, this is where we have some leeway, where we're not actually breaking the rules, but we could reveal some information to the public because these are things with great significant national interest and importance. But what we get is, no. We will stick to the letter of the law when it suits us. But when we need to get Brent Thomas, and we have no way to legally get him before he allegedly escapes to Greece. I mean, he was so desperate to escape to Greece, right? That's why when we brought him back, he stayed. We'll circumvent the law there, and then reward, apparently, people involved by making them Deputy Commissioner of Police. Only in Trinidad, I mean, these things happen around the world. It's just that it doesn't make it acceptable. So they needed something to trigger an investigation with regards to the deaths of the babies. Ironically, to some extent, that might require a medical investigation before criminal one, right? I don't know, like, we're going to get into real technical things with regards to how did the various individuals and units involved carried out their duties, right? And I suspect that if anything comes out of it, it'll be some degrees of negligence, maybe criminal negligence. I don't know if we have that classification in TNT. But I don't know if criminal charges could come out, because as alarming as it is, you know, negligence to some is, I don't think that'll classify as murder. Maybe pariah. I think the questions are much more pertinent, because it wasn't just, I think, actions of ignorance. To some extent, it was intentional. We just don't know what the motivations were. That's the unfortunate problem. And the thing about criminal charges is you have to prove things. The defense does not have to prove their defense. The prosecution has to prove their case. That's the trick. That's the catch. We have Diego Martin on the line. Good morning, caller.
Hi, good morning, Mr. Small.
Morning.
Yes, I don't hear anybody speaking about this travel expense stuff. And the expenses is very exorbitant. And to this person that they are paying these millions of dollars over there, why isn't it being investigated and find out who this person is and how all that money is spent? And it's millions of dollars, and apparently it's US dollars. So it's wasted going on right or wrong. You know, you cannot continue to do what we are doing and then complain that the foreign exchange is depleted. It must be depleted when all these things are going on. I'm not hearing about it. And you haven't heard anything from the government since the acquisition was made. Also have a problem with, yesterday I was watching the Parliament channel here with these people from the Pavia business. And I sat down and watched each fellas face there who was in that inquiry. And that means nothing to them. Absolutely nothing to them. About 3 or 4 of them here that sat down here inquiry. It's disgusting to watch these people, and these people lost their lives and like it's nothing. So that's all I have to say, and thank you for taking my call.
Thank you, caller. One thing, I'm not sure if the costs were quoted in US, they might have been quoted in TT. And with regards to some of those trips, like when going up to the States for national security reasons, and when going to the UK for energy reasons, and a lot of the energy conferences the Prime Minister traveled to, I think a significant chunk of the costs probably are justified. That doesn't mean that all of it is justified. So I believe you're right. Investigations into this need to happen. Of course, I don't expect them to happen, unfortunately. And in part, not fully, but in part because the opposition is far too weak in order to force any sort of issue or any sort of resolution or attempts to make one. We have Cascade on the line. Good morning, caller. You're on here.
It's been quite a marathon waiting on you, Mr. Small. Good morning to you and your listeners.
Morning.
First of all, I called to congratulate the police, the Belmont police. They had, I would say, I call it a town meeting last night for the residents of Belmont, St. Anne's, and Cascade. And they did bring a reasonably heavy contingent of senior officers to speak with the people of the communities mentioned. I think it augurs well for the development of police-community relationships, and I therefore feel these people must be commended for their efforts in establishing linkages with the 3 communities for which the meeting had been assembled. Let me say on another note, Mr. Small, I listened to you this morning, and I wonder whether you are really speaking to yourself. Because the issues that you raise aren't issues that are new in most part, but you brought new perspectives to the issues. And it is my hope that the people who are looking on would find ways to begin to resolve the litany of woes of which you have spoken. I mean, you speak about the hospitals, and I want to commend you, which is a difficult thing for me to do, to commend people who are doing good things. because I feel the standards should be far higher in the country. But you hit the nail on the head this morning in speaking about the growth in the population of hospitals. You know, the number of hospitals we've had in the country have increased significantly. It is like the number of community centers that have been built in the country that are significant. There's a new community center in Cascade, which has, I don't know if it's open or if it's closed, but I know I saw in the papers the MP Young was making a big thing, and then I saw an advertisement in the papers talking about this. But I don't know that anything goes on at that community center. And it would have been a community center for which much money was spent. It is ill-placed because it is in the middle of homes and communities. There's no real car parking. Cascade Main Road is a narrow road. And so if we do have a serious usage of that community center, God knows what will happen to those who live beyond the community center, who have to come and go. So I really think the more I see how things develop, and this point of the community centers comes off of your point on the hospital, I don't know the quality of service, the quality of medicine provided to the working people of this country has improved as a result of every additional hospital. Now, sometimes there are hits and misses because they built a beautiful new hospital in Arima, and all the reports I get suggest to me that Arima is now the go-to hospital. I suspect soon the Grande expansions will come on stream so that by the time the elections come on stream, they'll be able to boast, well, listen, we have done that, and so on and so forth. Who is the compliance officer in the Ministry of Health? Is there a compliance department and division in the Ministry of Health whose job it ought to be to oversee and to police quality and standards and service and use of funds at all these health institutions? Who really assesses the performance of the boards of these hospitals? And so these are the issues that I hope you will take up as you go forward in exploring the question of is bigger necessarily better? Is expansion of the hospital network in the best interest of the country? Or should we, as it were, provide the best facilities and services at existing facilities and ensure that people furthest away from the hospitals have access to the hospitals? I thank you this morning.
Thank you, Paul. More or less, yes. That is, all of those questions there are very important. And I do think there is something to be said about the benefits of distributing our health care services as equally and efficiently throughout the country so that it's not centralized, and then especially if it's centralized in Port of Spain and San Fernando, we already have congestion problems with too much of the country having to come into Port of Spain or go into San Fernando for various reasons. We need to disperse government services, healthcare services much more effectively. But of course, it has to be balanced out with sustainable growth. What's the point of having new facilities when shortages occur? Because I have seen examples of this happening 10 years ago. This is not something that's recent. Right? Yes, the Scarborough Hospital was a great leap from what we had, and there was a wait that Tobago had to have with the old hospital kind of holding on while the new one was under construction. Now, the new one is good, but it also has issues now of being able to sustain its staffing levels, as well as its, its operations with supplies, pharmaceuticals, etc., just like the rest of our public health service. So I did commend the new, administration building by the Savannah Charlotte Street there, next to Port of Spain General Hospital. The scheme seemingly, if the figures are reported that are correct, was a good deal for the country. But at some point, we do have to not lose sight of the point. Healthcare, not photo opportunities or good deals of expansion. Healthcare, executing healthcare. The thing about healthcare is you could be fine with mediocre slippers. You could get a cheap toothbrush or a cheap towel if you want. You could buy cheap soap. Ironically, in some ways, sometimes the cheap soap works better for me than the expensive soap. Not that I get all that expensive things, but you know what I mean. But healthcare is different. Cheap healthcare, more often than not, is a bad thing. Mediocre healthcare, more often than not, is a bad thing, right? You could get by with a cheap car, something cheap that's used, ain't gonna last too long, you know, but it's affordable for you right now. The maintenance might be there, but you make do. But bad healthcare, ironically, similar to a used car that's very old, will lead you to have more recurring expenditure trying to treat the problem, fix the problem that could get worse because of mediocre healthcare. So these are hard questions we have to ask, because I did say this, I think, last budget. If we really want something, we have to compromise and potentially give up something. The government didn't do that. It tried to hold strain, and I do wonder now if we are starting to see the economy free. Because they're trying to hold on to everything, but they're not actually able to fully afford everything. So everything gets underfunded, and it's slowly decaying because it cannot be maintained. As you said, the police officers that meet the public, we see the effort in certain programs, in certain initiatives. Too bad we don't see it at the top. And too bad we see too many examples of bad apples. But we should commend those that do their job and do it well and put in the effort. I know for a fact that there are a lot of problems with the public sector. It's a very large overall entity. When you add everything up, it's very difficult to manage. I'm not saying it's going to be easy. I'm not saying that the politicians could do it if they really wanted to with a snap of their fingers. But I am saying that it does need to be done, and it's not being done based on the evidence of the results of what we see across the board. What do we want coming out of the next election? And even then, it's an uphill battle. These are all hard questions that if we run away from, do not complain when we continue with the status quo that to many of us is unacceptable and leads to the deaths of hundreds of people a year from murder, dozens of people, if not more, in industrial accidents, and at this point, in April, 11 babies within the course of around a month or two from one hospital's neonatal unit. That's the results, as I said before, that we know of. Because just yesterday, some of these deaths, we didn't know as a public. We didn't know of them. Of course, the family knew, but we only found out today. Despite all the pessimism, folks, this is the land of our birth. We should fight for her. I still believe in TNT. Help all of us, those of you out there who still believe as well, to continue. We need a sense of national pride in this country in order to lift ourselves up from the doldrums. Make today a good day. Start with your individual interactions with the people that you see today. Remember our allegiance to the Republic. I will see you tomorrow morning. Bye-bye.
WESN.
Take some time for yourself or spend some time with the family at Sandy Point Village Hotel. Enjoy our various studio and suite apartments, self-contained with their own kitchenettes and Wi-Fi. We also have our famous 100-foot swimming pool and our beachfront restaurant, The Steak and Lobster Grill. And our location in Crown Point puts us near the center of activity from the nylon pool to the local nightlife. Call us and make your reservations at 639-8533, 389-2378 or email us at sandypointvillagehotel@gmail.com.
The home of Caribbean content is growing and we welcome you to be a part of the #1 platform for young personalities who are driven to make a positive impact in society. As we continue to reach every corner of Trinidad and Tobago through our daily broadcasts, our social media pages, or through our 75+ digital billboards across the nation, contact us to learn about our competitive rates via marketing at wesncc.com or call us at 628-5835. WESN Content Capital, television with a difference.
Every word, every line, every paragraph depicts a real moment in someone's life. A father, a sister, a mother, a brother. We at Newsday are dedicated to you, the people, and through independent, unwavering journalism, strive to always bring your stories to life. Because your stories are more than just words. Newsday, independent and credible.
The newest book is here, Closer to the Church, the debut novel by author and former mayor Louis Lee Singh. Available at all the home store branches, Barataria, West Mall, Shogunas and C3 San Fernando. Paper-based bookshop 10 Nook Avenue St. Anne's, WESN 30A Gattaca Street Woodbrook, Metropolitan Bookshop Ariapita Avenue Woodbrook, and all RIK bookstores nationwide. Available online as paperback on Amazon.com and Kindle for e-readers. For more info, call 628-5835 or 389-6504. Also available from author Louis Lee Singh, I Used to Live in Heaven, Letters to My Granddaughters, and Local Government in Trinidad, Conspiracy Against the People. FanZone, your reliable, authentic supplier, has just gotten better. You can now visit our website www.fanzonett.com for your authentic wear and collectibles. The only place where you can use both your Visa debit and credit cards. Visit our website fanzonett.com to make your purchase today.
Coming soon to WESN.
Pastor J, I want to get a tattoo.
You really
respond to me. Respond to me how you would respond to me.
The first question I'll ask is why.
Controversial taboo topics.
We get so consumed by church, we forget that we have to live the life of being a Christian outside of the Sunday.
Like you say,
services.
we think going to a service makes us a Christian.
Exactly.
Yeah, right. So